Hey, fellas. So this morning I want to start, we're going to do three sessions coming up, starting with today on focusing on desire and craving. And the somewhat tongue-in-cheek title of my talk today is Cease Craving equals Cease Clinging equals Cease Suffering. Because, as you know, in the heart of the Buddhist teachings is this profound yet deceptively simple truth about the nature of suffering and the cessation of suffering. This truth is, of course, encapsulated in the Four Noble Truths, which is the cornerstone of the Buddhist teachings. And the third of these truths points to the cessation of suffering by uprooting its cause. So that formula, cease suffering equals cease clinging equals cease suffering, really summarizes this profound teaching. And it invites us to explore the mechanisms of this human experience and how we obtain some freedom in our lives. In Pali, craving is referred to as tanha, T-A-N-H-A, which literally translates as thirst. And it arises as a deep-seated longing or desire, whether for pleasure, whether for existence, or even as the Buddha talks about it, for non-existence. I don't like how I am right now. I don't want to be this, so I don't want to exist in the moment. And it binds us to this cycle of suffering, this endless cycle, by perpetuating attachment to impermanent phenomena. Craving is not merely a desire for material possessions or sensual pleasures, which is how we usually think about it, but it also extends to the subtler realms of identity, opinions, and even spiritual progress. As you know, the Buddha taught that craving is the root cause of suffering. It's just a fundamental and critical teaching on this path. But this craving blinds us to the impermanence of all things. It entices us to grasp at those fleeting moments of joy, those fleeting moments of security, those fleeting moments of self-affirmation. And this very act of grasping leads to dissatisfaction, because what we cling to invariably changes, disappears, or slips away. And in this way, craving sets in motion a chain reaction. It gives rise to clinging, which in turn perpetuates our suffering. So clinging is the act of attaching ourselves. It follows we crave, then we attach ourselves with clinging to objects, ideas, or identities. It is the consequence of craving, clinging is, where the mind, seduced by desire, latches onto impermanent phenomena in the hope of finding stability or fulfillment. That's where we get tripped up. The Buddha described, you may recall, we've talked about this in the past, 4 types of clinging. Clinging to sensual pleasure, clinging to our views, clinging to what he calls rites and rituals, and then clinging to the sense of a permanent self. When we cling, we create a false sense of solidity in a world that is inherently fluid. There's the trap. For example, if we cling to relationships, expecting them to be unchanged, expecting them to be as we wish them to be, when we cling to this sense of a permanent self, believing it to be fixed or unchanged, that's what he's talking about. Those things are all impermanent. These attachments are built on the illusion of permanence. Because relationships evolve, our sense of self is constantly shaped by shifting experiences. So clinging, therefore, and I love this metaphor, it's like grasping at water. It slips through our fingers no matter how tightly we hold on to it. I think it's a beautiful metaphor to convey this teaching. This resistance to the natural flow of impermanence becomes the source of mental and emotional suffering, and it is everywhere in our lives. So to cease the suffering, the Buddha taught, we must uproot its cause, which is the craving and the clinging. We must see it when it arises. This is the essence of the third noble truth. When we cease craving, we no longer generate clinging, and when we cease clinging, the suffering diminishes, it lessens. Now, keep in mind that this cessation is not annihilation. It doesn't wipe it away, but it's liberation. It is the realization of the state of freedom from the bonds of desire and ignorance. We are free from that. And as you know, this path to the cessation of craving and clinging is the Noble Eightfold Path that the Buddha taught. It provides a roadmap. It provides practical guidance for ethical conduct, mental discipline, and insight, the three baskets that happen in that exist in the Noble Eightfold Path. Through mindfulness, we learn to observe and notice our desires. We learn to observe and notice our attachments without becoming entangled in them. Through meditation, we cultivate a tranquil and focused mind that sees reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. And then through wisdom, we understand the impermanence. We understand the unsatisfactoriness and selflessness of all phenomenon, which loosens our grip on cravings and attachments. So in our daily life, this formula, cease craving equals cease clinging equals cease suffering, can be applied in numerous ways. For example, consider the pain of a significant loss. If we examine this suffering closely, and it's very real, we find that much of it stems from our attachment to the idea of a permanence in the thing that we lost. But by understanding that all things are impermanent and cherishing the moments we have when we have it, we reduce the intensity of our suffering. We don't eliminate it, but we reduce the intensity that's caused by trying to make permanent those things which are not. Similarly, in moments of anger, frustration, mindfulness helps us recognize the craving that underlies these emotions. If we look at our anger, if we look at our frustration clearly, we can see that underneath them is almost craving for things to be different. The desire for things to be other than they are. And we can gently let that go. We can gently release it, but we have to first see it. Another example is this relentless pursuit in our culture of material wealth and status. The world conditions us, the culture conditions us to believe that happiness lies in the accumulation of stuff and achievement. Yet even when we attain these goals, the satisfaction is fleeting and the craving for more surfaces. That's why you see this endless cycle of acquiring stuff, more. But by practicing contentment, by practicing gratitude for what we have, we can begin to break free from the cycle of craving and clinging. We find greater peace and simplicity and greater peace and sufficiency. Now, let me be clear that ceasing craving and clinging does not mean abandoning all desires, all pleasures, all responsibilities. Instead, it means transforming our relationship with desire. Transforming our relationship with desire. Healthy aspirations, such as the wish to grow spiritually, to help others, can coexist with non-attachment. The key is to engage with the world without becoming a prisoner to it, without becoming a prisoner to our desires and our cravings. So in other words, to act without clinging to outcomes. Yes, we wish things would happen a certain way, but we don't cling to it in such a way that we suffer. To love without possessiveness, to love with this sense of not clinging so tightly to that other person, and to live with the acceptance that loss is inevitable. You know, this balance is beautifully illustrated in the metaphor of the lotus flower, which grows in muddy water yet remains unstained. You know, Thich Nhat Hanh says, no mud, no lotus. Okay, you can't have the lotus without the mud. Similarly, we live in the world fulfilling our roles and responsibilities. I'm not talking about, living in a cave and abandoning that. But we try to lessen the defilements of craving and clinging in their influence in our life. We see that suffering and ceasing suffering or reducing suffering is a timeless reminder of the path to freedom. It invites us to examine the roots of our dissatisfaction and to cultivate a way of being free that is without grasping and aversion. So by embracing impermanence, practicing our mindfulness, walking the Eightfold Path, we begin to transcend the cycles of craving and clinging. We taste the peace of freedom. And this is in a world that we're surrounded by that encourages us to crave, that encourages us to cling, encourages us to strive endlessly. The Buddha's teachings offer a radical alternative, and that is to let go. But this letting go is not resignation again. It's not throwing our arms up and giving up. It's freedom. The freedom to live in the present moment, unbound by these chains of desire, and experience the joy of liberation. So the path offers us the steps to take to realize the truth of this reduced suffering. So that's to cease craving, cease clinging, and lessen our suffering.